So what a great crowd, standing room only, obviously, if you take a look around. Obviously, this is as good as it gets. When you look around and see this many people, it's obviously a hot button topic. We have a panel chock full of experts in the subject matter, so really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. But before we get to that, I'd like to welcome Secretary of State Connie Lawson.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm certainly pleased to see such a large group of people here and what a large interest in this topic of crowdfunding that you're going to be hearing about today. And I want you all to know that over the last month, I've certainly enjoyed traveling the state and talking about crowdfunding. And, you know, we knew it was a good idea for Indiana to move forward, but I wanted you to know that I've been very pleasantly surprised at the reaction to our rulemaking. But I have to be honest, I've also been surprised at who it is that's coming up and talking to me about crowdfunding and the opportunity. And, you know, in the last 4 weeks, it seems like every other person that I've talked to about this opportunity, it's either somebody who's interested in a farming opportunity or a brewery. So it's not all high-tech. So beer and chickens, high-tech, and an art gallery, so far we know, are interested in crowdfunding. But that's really the beauty of helping Indiana move to the forefront of harnessing this power of the internet and social media. And it doesn't have to be, as I said, high-tech startups. It's about helping get good ideas off the ground. So this new market will change the way Indiana entrepreneurs and investors connect. So Hoosier companies are now able to raise up to $2 million over internet-based crowdfunding, and Hoosier investors are able to invest up to $5,000 in homegrown Indiana companies. So it seems like long ago, back in April of 2012, when the Jobs Act was signed into law, and it instructed the SEC to draft the rules to implement crowdfunding. Well, we're still waiting on those rules. And so that's why when this spring, when the Indiana General Assembly passed Governor Pence's crowdfunding legislation, I asked our team to get to work right away. And I let them know that, you know, the bill is effective July 1st, and I would love to have our rules ready to go on July 1st. And I'm proud to say they got that done in 3 months. And we've been able to do in 3 months what the SEC hasn't been able to do in over 2 years. So crowdfunding is now available in Indiana to startups and existing private Indiana businesses. And it can be used in conjunction with other more traditional financing options, but by using multiple investors on the smaller level, crowdfunding may allow the entrepreneur to stay in control of the vision and the direction of the business, which I know is very important, especially for early stage firms. So it's intended to be one more tool to help Indiana companies get off the ground and stay productive. So for investors, these rules create a new world of possibilities, and obviously there's a new type of investor as well, because now anyone can invest up to $5,000 in an Indiana-based offer. Previously, only relatively wealthy people who qualified as accredited investors could buy shares of companies not listed on the public stock exchange. So, you know, the reason is because during the Great Depression, Washington banned private companies from soliciting investments from the general public due to wanting to help prevent fraud. But in today's age, with this age of greater transparency over the internet, this prohibition has limited the small investor's ability to capitalize on the Hoosier entrepreneurial spirit. So my team and I have balanced investor protection with giving the startup and the venture community a leading edge. We worked with a coalition of Hoosiers who represent all interests, and I'm so thankful for their help. But we need your help to know how accessible we are, so we hope that you will continue to stay in touch with our office, because without your feedback, we won't know where to make adjustments and where we've hit the mark. So if I could just leave you with one call to action, it would be this. You know, you're going to be in this dialogue today about Indiana's crowdfunding environment, and crowdfunding needs all of us to have that dialogue so that it can succeed. So while our office will do what we can on the regulation side, I need the business community to help to get the good deals running through the pipeline. You know, Kansas has had a similar capital formation framework for years, but they've only had less than 10 deals run through there. So we want this to be successful, and I need you to help us identify the great prospects. I also need your help in allowing the market to quickly weed out the bad deals, because because this idea is still in its infancy, it won't be able to mature if the bad deals sour the market and keeps investors from taking the crowdfunding model seriously. So I'm going to turn it over to today's panel. I'm proud that my Securities Commissioner, Carol Mahalik, is here representing our office. She has a wealth of knowledge to share with you. And I just want to thank you again all for attending this morning. I wish I could stay. I'm on my way to Monticello to speak at the Rotary today. So I will see you all later. Thank you all very much.
If you look on your table in front of you, there are blank cards for you to write down questions. If you have a question, fill one of these in, hold it up in the air, and someone will come around and get it to our moderator. So on that note, I'd like to introduce to you a partner in our corporate department, David Hooper, who is well versed on this topic, and I'll let David introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you, David. And before the Secretary of State leaves, I just want to say, you mentioned farming and beer distributors, beer makers. And for beer lovers like myself, there's actually a nice synergy there. There's a lot of grain in beer, so that makes perfect sense to me and maybe a lot of others in the room. So thank you very much, Secretary of State. We really appreciate having here today. And it's great to see such a fantastic group here today for our presentation on crowdfunding, or crowdvesting, as many are now calling it, which, as many of you know, has been a very hot topic for many years. And it has been a hope and a vision, more or less, for many entrepreneurs for many years. But now we're finally beginning to see how these visions and hopes are actually being manifested in actual legislation and actual rulemaking that can actually be used now for the first time to raise capital. And luckily for us, here in Indiana, this drive to kickstart crowdfunding has really been led by the states at the grassroots level, mainly for what the Secretary of State mentioned, the SEC kind of dragging their feet on getting the Jobs Act crowdfunding rules finally implemented. But we're really lucky to have a Secretary of State's office and a securities division that has been at the forefront of developing these rules and balancing both the capital raising interests of our entrepreneurs with the legitimate interest in preventing fraudulent offerings of security. So we're really lucky to have that here in Indiana. And in this regard, during this last legislative session, the new Indiana state crowdfunding statute was passed. The exemption was approved by the General Assembly and signed by the governor, which went into effect on July 1st with an accompanying rulemaking. And as of the latest surveys that are out there with respect to state-level crowdfunding, Indiana is one of only 12 states that have actually passed and approved crowdfunding exemptions. There are other states that are considering crowdfunding exemptions and going through the legislative and rulemaking process, but Indiana is one of only 12. And many states just came to the table on this topic within the last month. So we're really at the forefront here. But now that we have this crowdfunding statute, now that we have these crowdfunding rules on the books, now what do we do? What do you do? How do you take advantage of these? What are the challenges? What does the Indiana crowdfunding exemption actually say? And that's what our panel is here to discuss today with you. So let me go ahead and introduce our panel quickly, and we can get to the substance. To my immediate left is Carol Mahalik. the Securities Commissioner for the state of Indiana. Carol has served in the division for many years as Associate General Counsel, Senior Counsel for the Securities Division, Director of the Auto Dealer Service Division, and she is a member of the North American Securities Administrators Association, which, by the way, the annual meeting is being held here in Indianapolis in September, hosted by Carol. So thank you, Carol, for being here today. We have Kevin Hitchen to Carol's left. Kevin is one of the founders of Local Stake, an investment crowdfunding platform, and one of the very early adopters of the crowdfunding concept here in Indiana, one of the very first website operators, maybe the first website operator here in Indiana, and Kevin is at the forefront of that. Prior to Local Stake, Kevin was with the Indiana Public Retirement System and at J.P. Morgan. So we're thrilled to have Kevin with us today. And finally, to Kevin's left, we have Chris Baggett, who many of you know, the founder of Compendium, which is the leading content marketing platform, helping organizations solicit and create original content for distribution to marketing channels. So we're thrilled to have all of you here today. So let's get this started off from the top. Carol, from your perspective, how do you summarize crowdfunding? How do you summarize what Indiana has done with crowdfunding and the exemption itself?
If you don't mind, I'm going to give you a little background about the securities division so you have an overview, because as I walked around the room, some of you have never really engaged with us or had a reason to. You've certainly heard about the SEC and FINRA, and we are in the news off and on locally here in Indiana for some of our activities, but we're part of the Secretary of State's office, and we have two primary functions. Which one generally involves investor protection, and the other an investor education, and the other is an enforcement component. And in the world of securities, we subdivide that even further into, we're in charge of licensing and registration of all products and all of those people who choose to sell security products in Indiana. And then we're also in charge of anyone engaged in bad behavior or behavior that's contrary to the statute in Indiana. So I'm a police officer. We're technically law enforcement in Indiana. So when we talk about securities, I want to emphasize first and foremost, this is serious, serious endeavors. Crowdfunding sounds fun. All of this sounds very fun. But at the end of the day, if an offerer doesn't represent truthfully what they've offered or what they sell, then the consequences can be severe and involve jail. I mean, we just had an arrest 2 weeks ago, and certainly not crowdfunding related, but nevertheless, someone who purposely or non-purposely, we don't know yet, went too far and misrepresented securities offers to many people. So insofar as licensing and registration, every product has to be registered unless there's an exemption. And we have a whole list of exemptions, and some of which involve the private offering market. And we're not talking about Google or Apple stock. We're talking about the private offering where someone like David helps a company seek out investors, and there's certain exemptions that we recognize already in Indiana. And those exemptions require very light paperwork coming into our office. We receive what's called notice filings. Well, what happened in July 1, after the legislature spent many months working on this with us, and of course the governor's office was a strong advocate of this, was we now have a new exemption. And this new exemption allows for access only in Indiana, among Indiana residents and Indiana businesses, that these startups can for the first time access everyday people in Indiana. While I'm sitting on my laptop at home, I can go on the internet and find an investment, even though perhaps I'm not what would be considered an accredited investor. I have $1 million in net worth, or I make $300,000 a year, some combination of that. I can now choose to invest in a local private offering, unlike never before, up to $5,000 from home, looking on the internet. From an enforcement standpoint, as the enforcement history I have, if you look at my bio, I take a deep breath because this is the first time that a startup company can reach an Indiana investor at home on the internet. It's wonderful for the startup company and potentially wonderful for that investor too, because I can choose as that investor to invest locally in something that appeals to me, or we'll hear from others, perhaps I'm related to someone I couldn't even invest before, but what a great opportunity, and what a great opportunity for the company to raise some new capital from some new people they've never had access to before. And I think the estimates are accredited investors are only 7 or more percent of the population. So look at all those other people that startup company can suddenly reach that they didn't have that opportunity to reach before. So generally, our rules have the outlines for that offer, the disclosures necessary for that type of an exemption to meet the test of that exemption, which is light paperwork coming to my office that we simply receive so long as certain parameters are met. Disclosures, an escrow is set up, and an internet operator is designated. So that's the big picture overview, and I don't want to go too long on that and maybe go to questions or we'll go to the other panelists. But we view this as a great opportunity, but one, David has been one of my advisory group. We have about 6 or 7 attorneys who've been assisting us as we work through this because this is so new. And when we were talking about 12 states, I think we're really going to be the leader because of our outreach efforts in people willing to take the leap in this and see how it goes. And we've presented ourselves as the regulator, perhaps that stop on the monopoly board of life. You have to do certain things. We don't want to make that a big stop for any of the people going around the board, but we want to make it malleable in the sense that if something's not working, we have the tools in place to adapt and fix it as we go. So we're excited for that reason as well.
Yeah, that's a great summary. So just to put a bow on what the Indiana exemption says from a high level, number one, the issuer of the securities must be organized within Indiana to take advantage of this exemption, number one. Number two, there is an intra-state scope to this. This is not an exemption where the issuer in Indiana can go outside of Indiana to raise the capital. You can't go outside of Indiana to use the proceeds of the offering. This is a intra-state scope to the exemption, mainly for legal reasons that we don't need to go into now, but that's a very important point. Number three, there are per offering and per investor caps, as we've already indicated today. $2 million for the offering itself on the high end, if you have audited financial statements, and for non-accredited investors, non-high worth individuals, the per investor cap is $5,000. And then finally, from a high level perspective, the offering, the crowd-funded offering, must be effectuated through a website operator, through an internet platform such as LocalStake. So those are really the 4 high-level aspects. There are others within the statute and the rules, but that's what you need to remember. And Kevin, what is it about crowdfunding, from your perspective, that makes this topic so popular? We've talked about the high-level legal aspects of the exemption, but what is it? Why the interest?
Sure, I think we've all seen the power of kind of the rewards-based, donation-based crowdfunding be pretty successful. So the Kickstarters, the Indiegogo kind of websites out there, from what started in kind of the late 2000s, in a matter of 5 or 6 years, I think it was last year, crowdfunding hit about $5 billion of funding raised. And that's a pretty large dollar amount. And you have people thinking of, can that whole mentality, that process, be kind of translated over to how businesses raise funding, right? So historically, when businesses have raised capital, it was a pretty inefficient process, where I could only go to people who were traditionally, for the most part, high net worth individuals. It involved, me having to know a lot of wealthy individuals, and a lot of them primarily invested only in either certain industries like technology or life sciences, or it can even involve very inefficient processes where it was a lot of coffees. If you've raised money before, you've known how long it takes to raise funding, how many coffees you're going on, and things like that. And it took 6 months, a year to raise funding. And with the internet kind of evolving, it's changing that. Just like how it's changed in a lot of different industries, it's making it more accessible to find people who could be interested in your company, to potentially invest in it, and vice versa. It's more accessible to individuals to potentially invest in private companies. In some ways, it's not exactly the same, but in some ways, it starts to look like the E-Trades, the Scottrades out there, but instead of investing in mutual funds and publicly traded companies, you're investing in private companies. Like I said, it's not exactly the same, but that's a way to kind of start to think about it as a mentality. Once again, so I think that's why it's very interesting to people, because you have, I think people pushing back on, maybe I'm not completely satisfied with the stock market, or I really want to help out my local economy and help out this company I believe in expand. So I think there's a lot of reasons why people are going to invest, maybe beyond just the potential for a financial return, which is different than the Kickstarters, the Indiegogos. With Crowdvesting, you can get more than just a T-shirt or a mug club membership. You can actually get an investment into a company. So I think that's also attractive to people in this kind of new society.
And Chris, you've been a leader in the entrepreneurial and business community here for many, many years. In many different contexts. But from the business owners and the entrepreneurs' perspective, I think a lot of people here would be interested in your thoughts on this. And what does the passage of this Indiana crowdfunding mean to you as the entrepreneur and the business owner, given your experience in bringing companies from essentially nothing to the public markets and being successful in that regard?
Right. It's phenomenal. And I've been an advocate of this for a long time. We sort of stumbled over this model. I should say, left out of my bio, by the way, is we are also, my latest startup is called Potluck Capital, and we're an operator as well. But we started Exact Target in that wasn't on there either, but co-founder of Exact Target. But when we started Exact Target in 2000, we were right in the dot-com bust. There was no money to be had. And we were hugely unqualified to start a business like this. None of us had any software experience. But we knew a lot of people. So as we couldn't raise big chunks of money, we kind of stumbled on this model of raising small chunks of money. Little known about Exact Target is we went door to door. Like in my neighborhood, I used to show this slide. There are 9 houses in my cul-de-sac. There are 5 swimming pools. All those swimming pools are the people who invested $5,000 in Exact Target. But they had to be accredited. So as we went through our Rolodexes and all of our college buddies and everybody we ever met trying to collect these $5,000 checks, we ran into this wall of accreditation that if you didn't have this, at the time it was $200,000 a year salary or $1 million net worth, you couldn't invest in Exact Target. And I've been very much, since 2000, been an advocate of this because it worked. We wound up, one of the reasons we had to go public is because we had over 500 private investors in Exact Target. And they were highly risky and really dumb investments on the part of the people who made them, but it worked out. So I've been just a strong advocate of this. Especially in the early stage, I do a lot of angel investing, and I find myself writing a lot of these $5,000 or $10,000 checks, and it's the raw seed money to say, does this idea deserve to live for 3 or 4 months to see if it can get going? And that's where I look at this. I don't really think we're going to see a lot of $1 million crowdfunding deals. I think we're going to see a lot of $50,000, $100,000 deals that say, I need to hire a developer and a small team, and let's get some runway so we can get from point A to maybe point C and build some credibility to go out and get some real money from accredited investors. And that's how I see this working. And the fact is, those of you interested in getting investment, at this level, you already know the people who can invest, right? They're your aunts and your uncles and your dad and your mom and your sister and a guy you went to college with and your army buddy or whatever. And being able to tap into that audience, people who have faith in you with a low enough number that nobody can get hurt. That was the thing we always loved about $5,000 as well, was no one's going to like lose their house if you blow $5,000 versus if someone gives you $50,000. Suddenly that becomes meaningful.
So that brings up a good point. It's sometimes difficult to look back with hindsight, but is this something that you would have suggested being used in the early days of Exact Target or Compendium?
Absolutely. I just wrote a letter, and when I met Carol, I told her the story of my Aunt Polly. So Aunt Polly, and Scott Dorsey is my brother-in-law, so she's actually both of our aunts. She had just received a $800,000 divorce settlement, a lump check of $800,000. And she wanted to put $5,000 in her nephew's goofy little business that she didn't understand, which nobody did. But she couldn't because she wasn't accredited. But nothing stopped Aunt Polly from going to buy a Harley, marrying a moron, going to the riverboat, right? There were tons of dumb things Aunt Polly was allowed to do with her money. 4 years later, Aunt Polly was dead broke, and is still dead broke. God love her. But, it's always struck me as, why is this the one dumb thing that Aunt Polly was not allowed to do with her money? Invest in her nephew, someone she knows and trusts and understands his work ethic, and the odds are that she would have lost that $5,000, right? These are the riskiest investments that anybody could possibly make. But at the same time, why do we draw the line to say, oh, no, Polly, go buy a Harley, go play the lottery, go to the riverboat, go down to Shelbyville every weekend. But no, you cannot invest $5,000 in your nephew, and that just always struck me as kind of silly.
And Kevin, that leads us to yet another good topic along the lines of what Chris was mentioning. He was mentioning who would be most useful in taking advantage of this exemption. From your perspective, as a website operator, someone who's on the ground seeing both the issuer side and the investor side of crowdfunding, who, in your opinion, what types of companies or businesses would be most interested in actually using crowdfunding?
Sure. Yeah, well, I think, first of all, there are some restrictions on the law, maybe not put on by the Securities Division, but more federally, where you have to meet certain requirements first off the bat, where you have to have a certain percentage of your revenues coming from the state of Indiana, for example. So if you don't meet those requirements, you're excluded from really using that. So I think, first of all, it's more local business. So either pure startups in the technology sector, things like that, where they don't have significant revenues yet, where that revenue requirement is going to be prohibiting them from using this new law. But I also think more consumer-based companies, I think, are also really great. So things like food and beverage, restaurants, breweries, retail, consumer good product manufacturers, things like that, who not only can the investors be investors, but they can also be customers, advocates, help those companies grow. So, we've helped a brewery raise money before, right? Well, that's fantastic. They really like having local investors because that's, 50 or 100 people who are going to be drinking their beer all the time, telling everyone they know about it, right? Telling their friends. So actually helping that company grow. And often, we've done things where like the brewery that's raising money gives out perks as well. So, you might get a free beer every week or something like that as well as being an investor. So I think there's things like that people can understand, right? Versus a complex, no offense to life science companies out there, I think it'll be more difficult for life science companies where, they have a very complex product, to understand. Most people do not have, doctorates or are not scientists to understand whether that, new FDA approved, theoretically, hopefully, FDA approved drug is going to even be approved or understand the benefits of it. So, I think, but for a brewery, most people can understand those types of things. So I think more easy to understand consumer-based companies will benefit the most from my personal opinion. Doesn't mean you won't have some of those other companies raise funding via crowdfunding, but I think that's also the case. I think also the dollar size. I think we'll see for the most part, maybe the 50 to 75,000 on the low end. Not anything lower. I think there's just cost to raising money and to put everything together. Where you start going below that, it's going to be cost prohibitive. But maybe on that, on the low end, up to about 500 grand. I think that's, at least here in the beginning, until things start getting going, I think that's really the sweet spot for crowdfunding, investment crowdfunding. I think the other thing then is the type of capital or the type of investment you're receiving. This is not just for equity investments. So it's not, that is one of the options a business could offer investors. It could be part ownership. But there's other things like loans that, the business could do where investors get some interest as well, so instead of equity. So there's a lot of different options there where I think it will be startups. I think we're already seeing established companies express interest in it. So that's at least my kind of point of view on it.
Yeah, and along those lines, again, going back to the intrastate scope of this exemption, as Kevin just mentioned, under these rules, which are mainly coming from the federal rules that are incorporated into the exemption for the issuer that's raising money in a crowdfunded offering here in Indiana, 80% of the gross revenues and assets of the issuer must come from Indiana sources. And 80% of the net proceeds of the offering have to be used for operations in Indiana. So that is the safe harbor that permits the intrastate exemption, the intrastate aspect of this exemption to be satisfied. And in that regard, Commissioner Mahalik, what are the challenges that issuers and investors are going to face, and mainly from the perspective of enforcement, with respect to this crowdfunding exemption? What are the challenges and potential problems that you see coming out of this?
I feel like I'm at a debate because I'm about to answer a question you haven't asked, and change the subject, because Chris mentioned something and Kevin's sitting here. The internet website operator is a new license in Indiana that's created from this statute. So the second someone wishes to become an Indiana website operator to host these offers, that's a new position. And Chris mentioned he's about to release a potluck is his. We have local stake, and we have one other one that's told us they're trying to start up and get all the documents in order, which is called Hoosier Crowdfunding, of course. So it's interesting, and we also have banks getting involved in a new way, setting up escrow agreements for both so the issuer can have that ready on the website. Having said that, what are some of the concerns? Well, the first one is the internet website operator does not have to have a physical presence in Indiana, just an LLC or registration in Indiana. So we've incorporated, towards the end of the statute worked through as we did, we incorporated the ability to audit them at their expense. So if they truly are based in Silicon Valley and we have some issues or concerns, we get to go out there even though we're in Indiana. We're very concerned. Certainly the SEC can fly all over anytime they want. We can't. So we built in that functionality. From another enforcement standpoint, interestingly, well, we do know, first off, that a lot of businesses fail. This is high risk. Chris has said that over and over again. So a business failure is not fraud or something we're going to take action against. Investors just have to know, and there's disclosures built in, they just have to know these are high risk and illiquid. They can't get their money back in 60 days if they change their mind once the issue is fulfilled. We see fraud, unfortunately, sometimes evolving out of license holders who create some new product, some new scheme. Invariably, we call them a Ponzi scheme, money in, money out. Money keeps coming in from the new investors, those who are lured in and given to the ones they've made promises to in the past. And more often than not, they're unregistered products, sometimes unlicensed individuals that we only hear about when it goes bad. So the fact that there's registrations built in here and someone has to communicate with our office, we're not going to be scrutinizing these offers. We're not going to say these are good or bad offers. That's not our role. We're just going to be accepting the paperwork. And then on our website, which I invite you all to explore because this exemption is called Invest in Indiana. We have a whole page devoted to it. Invest in Indiana. So you go on the Secretary of State's website, Securities Division, and then Invest in Indiana. There's a lot of information, and we're going to list the website operators as they become operational. Unlike any other offering that exists in our office, we're actually going to post the website operators so that that's a place that you could seek out and see what the offers are, that transparency that the Secretary talked about. So we're there, we're ready if something goes awry, but we're going to hope it doesn't and it all works.
Let's talk about the website operator concept and aspect of the rule for a couple minutes. We got a good question from the audience, why was it that the crowdfunding statute and the rules only allow crowdfunded offerings to be effectuated through a website operator, from your perspective?
Well, this is the first time out. It mirrors but builds on what the Jobs Act intentions were. And this access was not meant to be billboards, mailers. The access was meant to be through a specific portal modeled on the Jobs Act, although in Indiana we're calling it a website operator, so that there's a certain element of control in the sense of this is where it is, it's only happening right here. That doesn't mean that brewery can't put 1,000 cards on every table that says, go to this website and you'll hear all about how to invest in my company. Doesn't mean the company couldn't put on Facebook, go to my website and this is where you can invest. But it's designed to control, and typically those who affect securities transactions have to be registered as brokers. That's a very significant process. Kevin is a registered broker. Testing that I would not want to do. I dabbled with it for a while. I do not want to go through it. So it's very substantial, and this platform is designed, or this website operator is sometimes referred to as broker light. So long as you go through this, you don't fall into the trap, the accidental trap of offering a security and not being licensed, so long as it's through this portal. Otherwise, if you offer a security and you're not licensed, and we hear about it, tons of horrible exposure for you. You don't want to do that. You know, some of my meetings we go to, we actually explain and remind people what is a security. It's if somebody offers me an opportunity that all I have to do is give them money and sit back and wait for the fund to happen. Generally, that's the first test, is this a security offering? If I'm involved in it, in what we're developing, then I'm a partner, and that's generally not going to be a security. But it's that passivity that's the first trigger for us in our analysis.
So Kevin and Chris, as really the leaders in the website operator space for this crowdfunding exemption, what do you see as the challenges? We've heard the commissioner's thoughts on the challenges and potential problems with this. What about, from your perspective, the other side of the ledger? What are going to be the challenges that a lot of folks in our audience are going to experience if they come to you and ask you to help them with a crowdfunded offering?
Sure, I think there's a business point of view and an investor point of view to that as well. So I think a lot of investors need to know that if an issuer decides to use this law, they can only make an offer and accept an investment from an Indiana resident. So in some way there has to be some proof there that I'm actually talking to an Indiana resident. And when you invest in any private company, or even if you go and open an account on any investment website, you typically have to provide information about yourself. So this is not a Kickstarter. It can't be done with credit card. I mean, that's margin, so that's not allowed. So you will have to enter some information about yourself when you invest in a company. I mean, they need to know for tax purposes, who am I going to send this tax thing to at the end of the year, because you're, hopefully making money. So there's things like that you're going to have to provide to platforms when you choose to go invest and view the opportunities, just like you would maybe when you sign up in any other investment website or open a bank account, things like that. I mean, there's information you have to provide. From the business point of view, I mean, there is, once again, information you have to provide to investors. So it's not, I have, one-page executive summary, I'm ready to go raise funding. There's information that you have to provide. A lot of it's, in the rules of what you have to provide investors. And for the, for the most part, I think it's very good what you have to provide. I think there should be levels of information that you have to provide investors so they can make an educated decision. So it's never going to be easy to raise money, whether it's investment crowdfunding, the old laws of trying to raise funding. It's never going to be easy. I think it's another tool to use, but I just want to reiterate there that you're going to have to provide information about your company, business plans, financials, things like that, so that they can make an educated decision about what they're about to invest in.
And the only other thing I would say is that the operator is not going to raise the money for you, right? The idea that you're going to put your potato salad recipe up on crowdfunding sites and make $60,000 isn't going to happen to anyone in this room. We still have to work, right? You still have to work your Rolodex and call every college buddy and knock on your neighbor's doors, and you're the ones that have to sell this to your investors. and get them to the operator, right? It's not like anonymous people are going to be investing in your company. Now, some anonymous people might, if it starts getting momentum and, depending on how the site shows you how successful it is, there are people who will troll and look for deals that look good. But generally speaking, most of the money is going to come from people you already know at this level. So you still have to work your networks. You still have to hustle to get this money. It's not like I'm going to post it on Craigslist and the money's just going to come.
That's a really good point, Chris. It appears from some of the early indications that on the investor side, the folks that are considering or actually using the crowdfunding exemption from the investor side are the folks that we've always seen, the family and friends, business associates, et cetera. Now, Kevin, from your standpoint, who are you seeing from the investor side using crowdfunding, or at least seriously interested in using this? Is it the folks that have invested in our startups here for years, the high net worth accredited investors, or is it, Aunt Ginny down the street?
I've seen both. So I think you're going to have both on there. You're going to have, high net worth accredited investors who invested in other companies before. We've seen people like that sign up on our platform. We've seen, this also kind of be viewed as a more formal, maybe more organized friends and family round as well, right? Where, sometimes friends and family rounds are done very informally, very unorganized, where it's just no one knows what they're really getting in exchange for that check I'm handing over. So I think in some way it's a much more formalized, for the better, way to raise funding from friends and family and business contacts. And I think, let's not forget customers. I think that's a huge factor of I am a X company, especially if I'm established. I can reach out to my customers or my fans on my Facebook pages or things like that to just let them know that we're expanding and, hey, you like our product, you like whatever we're doing, you want to help us open a second location, you can have that opportunity. But we see both. I'd say right now on Locusec it's about half and half accredited investors, half non-accredited investors.
And I think it's important to reiterate what an accredited investor actually is. The term comes from the federal, the SEC rules on private offerings. And basically, an accredited investor is an individual that has a net worth of $1 million or greater, or, and this is an important or has an annual income of $200,000 or more in 2 of the last 3 years, or $300,000 with their spouse. So on some levels, it's something of a low threshold for many, and the SEC is currently engaged in their own discussions to amend this accredited investor concept to increase those thresholds, which has its own controversy attached to it. Many in the startup world and the venture capital community are not necessarily pleased with that. There has been no final rulemaking in that regard to adjust these accredited investor thresholds, but the early indication is something will occur. Something will occur, either indexing these thresholds to an inflationary concept and increasing it that way, or an outright increase. Those thresholds haven't been increased in something like 30 years. So in a way, it's a little bit outdated, but the point is that these accredited investor thresholds are going to fluctuate. They're probably going to be increased within the near future, so you'll have a larger pool of non-accredited investors who will be available for issuers to use as investment.
Could I jump on one of Kevin's
Sure.
points, which I hadn't really contemplated before, but was brilliant, and that is the idea that it's forcing you through a process as well. Mike can probably speak to this from a Halo standpoint, but a lot of investments that I get approached with are uninvestable because of a structure that the entrepreneurs set up with their early investors. And the thing is so convoluted and messed up that even though they're great people and it's a great business, the structure of it is, and I wish I could give you examples, but I probably shouldn't, looking at my attorney. But this happens all the time, that you see great companies that made such bad process decisions early on when they were first getting started, and I gave my brother-in-law 50% for $10,000, and any investment money comes in, he gets $50,000 before any money, those kind of deals. So having this structure, I think, is really going to help eliminate all of that as well. So, sorry, good point.
We have a great question for Commissioner Mahalik on the Invest in Indiana webpage. Will this page on your website actually list the offers or the securities offerings that are using crowdfunding, or will it just link to operators such as local stake and pilot?
Just operators. And again, we don't review these filings, so we don't want to accidentally find ourselves in a position where someone believes that we're endorsing the issue. The brewery, the ice cream shop, the candy shop's kind of my favorite. But but we will list the operators, and then that way they can link to the offers that are out there, because you can't have an issue without a registered operator. The two go together. So we will list the operators because it's a new registration, and we think that allows for access and helpful access to businesses to see what's out there and for investors.
Another good question, and these are excellent questions regarding kind of the ins and outs of the exemption in the rulemaking itself. There's a question whether a disclosure document is required, and I think we may have touched upon this before. Is a disclosure document, a PPM, an offering memorandum, required for a crowdfunded offering, or is it simple as throwing up a website and raising money that way? The answer is yes, a disclosure document is required. And there are specific aspects of the disclosure document, specific disclosures that must be adhered to in order to take advantage of the exemption, and they are laid out within the rule itself. So that's a very important point. That is an aspect of this offering that may create a little bit more work for issuers, but it's very important from an investor protection standpoint, as with any other private offering, to ensure that all material disclosures, all important disclosures about your company, about the issuer, is provided to the investors. So yes, a disclosure document is required.
May I add just one comment?
Absolutely.
Again, and a lot of this might be facilitated on the website. Our rules are 3 pages compared to the 30, 40 pages and 500 pages of comments that the SEC had. We've taken a very light approach to allow businesses and to work this through and do it in the right way without us telling them, giving too much direction. I will be receiving a business plan, but I will not be reviewing it. And I guess there's all kinds of business plans out there. So it will be up to the investor to look at that. If the business plan is on 1 page versus 10 pages, it won't be up to me to say, good business plan, you're good to go. I will simply be receiving it in this environment, much like other private offerings where we receive notice filings. So that's very important for investors to know and understand, and businesses to know and understand. We have lawyers, but we can't be their lawyers and say, by the way, you can do a better job. We won't be giving that guidance. We'll be looking to the business to seek out good guidance and help on their own.
And I'll add something to that. I think, what we've seen in other states that we've been operating that have crowdfunding laws and, other offerings we've done, I think when you invest in a private company, I think one of the, business plans are great. I mean, information there, but I think one of the benefits of local investing, and I think angel investors do this, and even venture capital. I mean, go meet the team. I mean, a lot of the companies that we work with, they host events. I mean, that's one of the great benefits of that. So, whether if it's a tech startup, right? I mean, go look to see a demo, meet the team, ask them questions. I mean, go to their offices if they have them. If it's a brewery, try the beer. If the beer tastes terrible, that should be an indicator that you probably should invest in it, right? I mean, but there's things like that. So in addition to the information on these platforms, I mean, if it's a food company, try the food. I mean, you should do those types of things, just like you should. So I mean, in that sense, I mean, due diligence as an investor is important, but I think it spans many different things depending on the company.
I don't know about you, Kevin, but there is no such thing as a bad Indiana beer right now. They're all good. They're all good. let's talk about some practical aspects of this as we come to the end of our hour. You know, whenever there's a new securities exemption or a new concept that comes out for a capital raising concept, in many circles there's a lot of reticence in using it. For example, as many of you know, there's new SEC rules that are fairly new now that allow general solicitation of securities offerings. But there's been a lot of reticence as I've traveled around the country and talked to people about using it for fear of reputational risk, if you will, that it doesn't seem as above board as the traditional friends and family private placement memoranda, staid type of offering. Do you see a reputational risk with issuers using crowdfunding, especially in the early stages, and maybe as that affects a later stage, a Series B, a Series C round coming after that? Is that a legitimate concern?
I think one of the concerns I've seen from some businesses when using the other law you just mentioned was they have additional questions, right? There's some lack of clarity around maybe certain questions of the law. I mean, I can personally say that the Securities Division's office has been fantastic at responding to questions. I mean, just you have a question that's, they will respond to it. I mean, so from that sense, they're very open to, I think, and, excited for companies to use it properly. So I think from that stance, that shouldn't be a hesitation from an attorney or a business, reach out to the office and ask questions. We have, and we've had good success with that.
And Commissioner, he said that even outside your presence to me. So
Well,
just because you're.
And I do see Alex Glass, my chief deputy. I think
Yeah.
I saw him here, who's answering Kevin's 5 questions a day. Just so you know.
Yeah.
So thanks for his work.
Yeah, and but from a reputational standpoint, I think a lot of it is I think the pushback from potential VCs, and once again, you've got to think about, are you a business that's going to potentially raise venture capital money, right? Maybe 1% of companies who raise funding actually go down and get venture capital funding. So, once again, there's certain companies that maybe fit a growth trajectory towards venture capital. But there is some pushback by some venture capitalists. Some really love crowdfunding. But some pushback and say, I don't want to have 100 investors or 200 investors, whatever the number of investors are on the cap table, because they could potentially mess things up if we want to get acquired or there needs to be a vote or something like that. I think there's ways to take care of that, right? I mean, it's how you structure your offering, right? So first of all, not every investment crowdfunding offering has to be equity, right? So that's one way to solve that issue. Another way is to structure your equity correctly, right? So get good advice, right? Plan this. Go talk to an attorney when you're thinking about doing this. Talk to other companies who have investors. I mean, I've seen companies with angel investors who have 50 investors or,
Right.
A large number. And,
We had 57 in compendium before we got VC money. So.
And, I think if a VC really wants to invest in your company, they will find a way to invest in your company. I mean, if that's the case. Or, I think structuring is important when you're doing this. Finding the right security for your company is important. There's a lot of companies we work with who equity doesn't make sense, right? I mean, they don't want to give up equity, or equity from an investor point of view maybe doesn't make a sense as something else. So we look at other ways to facilitate investment offerings like a loan or some other type of investment, a revenue share we do a lot of, where we do those instead of equity. So I think a lot of it, from my point of view, is going to depend on that. But especially from the ones where they don't expect to get future financing, there is very little hesitation or worry about their reputation. If anything, they're excited for the new law. So,
And if I could just say, be careful of valuation, right? Because we haven't mentioned that word yet, but that's really, really important, right? As an entrepreneur, you want to have the highest valuation if possible and sell as little of your company. Don't sell 25% for $18,000 when you need to go back to the well 2 months from now to get more money, and now all of a sudden, suddenly, and again, I've been working with a local food company that this is exactly their problem, is the owner looked up one day and said, geez, I don't own this company anymore, because she just kept selling chunks of her equity off, and when she came time for the VC and the big time, she had no control of her own company before the VC, which you're going to lose control after the VC, but just accept that. But valuation is a big thing.
And Chris and Kevin, again, from the website operator standpoint, from a big picture standpoint, what's in it for you? How do you get compensated, so to speak, or paid from acting as a website operator? Is it mostly philanthropic to to increase the Indiana startup community, or how are you able to get compensated?
Well, that's a good way to explain the two different kinds of operators,
Absolutely.
too, because we're different. Then go ahead.
So we are a broker-dealer, right? So we can actually take a percentage of the funding raised, so a success fee, if you will. So most of our funding is tied to a successful fundraise. So if they raise the funding, kind of like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, if you're familiar with that, they take a percentage of the funding raised at the end. That's very much how we operate for most of our revenue. Now, with that said, I mean, we started to be a growing company. So we are working here in Indiana, but we're headquartered here in Indianapolis, but we also have operations and help companies raise funding in other states. So Michigan and Wisconsin and other states that we operate in. So we're beyond the state borders. And we can also use different laws. So as in case you don't fit the criteria that you must meet, the revenues or the assets or things like that, as a company, as a broker-dealer, we are not necessarily solely restricted to using this one law. We can use the existing laws, and we have, for companies who are looking to raise funding. So I think that's us, at least.
Right. And we are not a broker-dealer, so we are a flat fee. Our customers will pay a flat fee to be on our platform, and that's the end of our relationship. So we facilitate, we provide the documents, we host everything, but we're not broker-dealers. So that's the big difference. And I think it's great that we've created a system, thank you, Carol, to accommodate both.
Well, we're bumping up against the end of our hour. I can't believe it. It's gone so fast. And I wish we had all day to talk about this. But as we get to the end of our discussion here, from putting a bow on this, from putting a big picture bow on this, I'll ask each of you essentially what your prediction is as to how you see this working in the near term particularly, and longer term. Is this going to be something successful for Indiana?
I think it is for a number of different reasons, and knowing about what's happening in some of the other states. One is that we're out talking about it very quickly because we want to have that communication working. My advisory group, and if you don't mind, I should give some credit, which was David Hooper, Hannah Joseph at Cat's Corn, Tim Kappen at Ice Miller, Jeff Bailey at Bose, Karen Woods at Krieg DeVault, all very helpful. We work to get this going and to let people know. Plus, we've got people like this, Chris Baggett, Kevin, who have been there, done this in varying forms. So I think it has potential for the small business who maybe can get $50,000 from a bank and needs another $100,000, and the bank says, I can only give you $50,000. This is a great way to get that secondary funding. So I'm optimistic. Our communications are open. We want it to work. So again, I said we can flex, we can massage things as we go forward, but if there is misrepresentation, we'll act quickly that way as well to get the bad actors out of the marketplace. So yes, I'm very optimistic.
I'm as well. So I can say with some confidence, I think we'll start seeing companies use it very soon. In the sense of submitting materials, hopefully in the next couple of days. So I think we'll start to see it used very quickly, and I think hopefully we have some initial successes with companies who are looking to raise funding. I think that's always important. But I am optimistic. We've seen companies use this in the past and at local stake. I mean, different laws, but in a similar format or in different states, and it's gone over really well. Investors are excited, the businesses are excited. So I think that regardless of what type of company it is, I think all fundraising is moving online. It's a much more efficient process. So I think just in general, this investment crowdfunding law is going to be really good.
And yeah, I'll jump on that bandwagon. Obviously, we're launching a startup. I started talking about this last Monday. I believe we've compiled a list of about 100 startups already to join the platform. So there's a lot of demand out there, clearly from the startup standpoint. We didn't get a chance to talk about social media, but I think that's a game changer for this as well. Every business should be having Facebook pages, and there are aspects of this that you can promote through your social media and your network that, just like customers, if you have fans, you're allowed to tell them you have an offering, you have to lead them and Carol, you can explain it better than I, but I think that's an important point to talk about what you're allowed to do.
You have to lead them to the portal, right.
Well, I can really echo Commissioner Mihalik's sentiments on the transparency that the Securities Division has shown. They've been incredibly transparent, and the outreach has been extensive to those of us in the legal community and the business community to, number one, understand how this is supposed to work, how it can work, what are the benefits, what are the drawbacks. Experience will dictate a lot of whether this will be successful 5, 10, 15 years down the road. But I think with the commissioner's leadership and the leadership of folks like Chris and Kevin in the community here, we're off to a great start. So I want to thank you both, all of you personally, for being here today to talk about this. It's been a great discussion. I'm sure there will be more questions as time goes on. I have a book of questions here. I've never seen so many. Can't get to all of them today, and sorry for that, but we will be available. We're always available. The commissioner's always available, and her team is as well. So thank you very much for being here today, and hope you had a good time at it.